Hi, this is Mark News from Plant Talk Radio. Thanks for subscribing and listening to our podcast, Your Gardening Questions from Plant Talk Radio. If you have a gardening question you'd like our host Fred Howard to answer, send him an email. The email address is fred@planttalkradio.com. Now for today's question. Today from Scott's, our old friend Ashton Ritchie is here to give us more about lawns and what we need to do this spring. And we have an email question in, fred@planttalkradio.com. It came in from Megan. And she says, we have some tall grasses in a raised bed around our back patio. I'd like to have some perennials to put in the spaces between the grasses that would give us some color. But I really don't want shrubs like roses, but more like flowers. Any ideas? The area gets morning sun and shade in the afternoon.
Okay. Morning sun is going to be very beneficial. We don't know how tall the grasses get, but we can assume that the new plants will get at least a half a day of good sun, which usually suffices for anything. And then I have to picture this in my mind to be able to answer it. And I will also encourage the consideration of annuals. The reason being that things that will work for you, such as Shasta daisies and coreopsis, and then a grass-like plant called sedge that has its own flower, but more especially it has a green and white, or one of the varieties has a green and white leaf that will cover some of the bottoms and so on. Also, considering those things, then you can set up a progressive amount of color, but each perennial is going to bloom for, let's just call it 3 weeks. Now that varies a little bit. You can do some heading back on the plants early and cause them to come at two different color times in color and so on. But as I mentioned, the Shasta daisy, the coreopsis, and so on. I also think then of things like marigold and zinnia and annuals of that nature that will give multiple colors well, it depends on how your grasses are lined up and how far apart. I would definitely come forward from the grasses because they can be quite competitive. The shade is one thing, but let's just say that if the grasses have any age to them at all, I'd stay a full 18 inches from the edge of the last grass, blade coming up. I would stay 18 inches or more forward of that so the plants get full sun period in the morning, and then they also will have a little less competition from the big grass plants. So, Ashton, what would you add to that?
Oh gosh, Fred, this is one of those things where when you go to a public garden, you get ideas. And there's so many great public gardens in Central Ohio or in the state of Ohio that you could get ideas. But I could visualize maybe some daylilies.
Yes,
would be good in there because they're pretty easy care, and some of the varieties do bloom for quite a long time.
Right.
And then you can pick the colors that you're looking for. Some years Black-eyed Susans do, put on quite a show in Ohio. But you already mentioned, everything in that kind of group with daisies and so forth.
Yeah.
But the other thing is if you've got some shade in there, if you go to the garden center and the annuals, as you mentioned, some of the things like Coleus, there's so many different kinds of Coleus, and they really would get quite large in those areas, but you would have to do those each year.
Well, and that's true with the annuals, and I want to speak to Coleus. They are not any longer grandma's old plant. They don't have to have shade, etc. Many of the Coleus have been bred to be able to take full sun, many leaf colors and so on, and some of them will get up toward 2 feet tall.
So they might be a good.
Right.
I like Coleus blending in with grasses.
Right. So I hope that'll help Megan some. There are multiple plants that can be used. I would, however, strongly recommend the blend. But then considering the blend with annuals and perennials, more perennials, of course, in your case, but then think fall also. A few mums, a few asters spread in through there would give some fall color, too.
That's a great idea.
Hey, thanks again for listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our other podcasts as well, the Plant of the Week podcast and the Plant Talk Radio podcast, all on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to sponsor a daily podcast, contact us at fred@planttalkradio.com. To find out more about Fred Hauer and Plant Talk Radio, visit our website, planttalkradio.com.
Circle270media.com